Welcome to Tiger Chainsaw Interviews. These exclusive interviews will give you a behind-the-scenes retrospective mixed in with some amazing secrets of your favorite games and franchises by the developers and creators of them. Now, if I have filmed the interview, you'll be able to watch it. Otherwise, it's a phone interview, so just sit back and relax. Now, I have done some incredible exclusive interviews with some amazing gaming legends in this community. So hit that sub button to make sure you don't miss any of those interviews. Alright, let's get to our interview of the day. My guest today is Maurice Suckling, who helped write the plot of the one-time very popular series of Driver. Since then, he's worked on over 50 published video games, including The Killing Floor 2, Borderlands the prequel sequel, and Civilization 6. Now, he's in the business of storytelling for board and card games, but we're taking a trip down memory lane. Maurice, thank you so much for joining me today. When I was researching your career, I believe that Driver was the first video game that you ever worked on. How did you get involved in the project, and what were you doing before as work?
So Gareth Edmondson is the short answer to the first part of that question. So Gareth was a friend of mine at university. We were both at university together at Bristol University, doing completely different subjects. We just happened to be placed in halls of residence, and our rooms were near to each other, and we got to know each other. And it was sometime after we'd graduated. It was a few years after graduation, and Gareth did a subject quite different, as I said, from mine. So he studied civil engineering. I studied a subject called religion with literature. Anyway, so Gareth went off to go be a civil engineer, and after a few years of that career, he jumped careers to join his brother, Martin Edmondson. So Martin had a video game company. They that company was called Reflections, and they'd already made some successful games. Shadow of the Beast was one, and more recently in this timeline they'd made Destruction Derby, which was a 3D driving simulator game where you didn't just race around an arena, you also kind of smashed into other cars. Anyway, so Gareth went to go work with his brother, and as a producer, and they were working on this new game, Driver, and they were handling storytelling, which they'd never really had to do in any of their previous games, at least not to this extent. And I think I was the only writer that he that he knew. He was like, well, I don't know what to do with this. So I was, as I said, I did this religion with literature undergraduate degree. So my career path was slightly less clear, but I had begun writing. I was starting to do some comedy writing. I did some work for Comic Relief, a TV show in the UK, and starting to do some develop a sitcom that didn't happen, and a sketch show that didn't happen, and was doing freelance writing, helping product launches and that kind of thing, often with a comedy angle to it. And I was busy doing that when Gareth said, "Oh, hey, I need to talk to you. I've got a project we need to chat about."
Well, now that sounds like a pretty nice project that you got roped into. Can you take us back to 1999 at Reflections office? What was the atmosphere like? What was your desk like? Can you kind of paint a picture for us of how the offices were back then?
Yeah, so, well, back in 98 when I joined the project, so 99 was when it came out, I came onto the project in '98, I think. So the offices were in a place called Team Valley, which was it's a slightly sad industrial estate in Gateshead, which is a town adjacent to Newcastle upon Tyne, in the very north of England. And this industrial estate the building was just very functional, barren, kind of yellow strip lighting, and the office was way too big for the number of people that we had in it. Very just functional desks that had no real feature or character to them. Everything was just I remember the chairs weren't comfortable. I remember the desks were just uninteresting, just got the job done kind of desk. But when I actually first began, my desk was in Martin's office. Martin was often away traveling at the time, starting to kind of shop the game and having lots of meetings in London and the US. And I was in his office, which was a joint office with Chazelle Stewart, who was the studio manager, and there were just these two desks in that room. It was quite a large room, and it was at the very end of the building with a glass wall that had a door in it that kind of separated it from the rest of the office, so it kind of looked down the office. And yeah, Martin just wasn't around at that desk very much when I was there for the first couple of weeks. So when Gareth hired me, he hired me for 2 weeks. He said, because I was a freelancer, so I would people would hire me by the day or the half day, or by the week or something would be kind of how it would normally work. And he said, we've never done anything like this. Can I book you for 2 weeks? So I lived in Oxford in the south of England, so most of my work was in London, so that meant that I had to kind of push other clients back. But anyway, it sort of rapidly became apparent that this was going to take far longer than 2 weeks for me to do my work on it. I think I was there about 7 years in the end, but
so a little bit longer than 2 weeks.
yeah. And then eventually I moved to a different. I think I had a few different places around the office where, I would just kind of perch on the end of whatever available desk there was. And like I said, to begin with, there was a lot of available space. I mean, there were very few people really there. I think there were about 20 people in the studio when I was first there, maybe slightly fewer than that. And over the time I worked for Reflections, they grew to about 200. So I mean, there definitely was this sense of new people were appearing all the time, and I think so. As I recall it, there was this feeling, there was this kind of buzz that there was something special about this game, that it wasn't just another game. There were certainly big expectations about it, and the art team in particular, I think, I remember a buzz from them. There really wasn't much of a design team. It was really, there was a code team and an art team, and Gareth was kind of running the production side of that. I think I'm right in saying that there was a kind of wariness on the tech side, more than sort of an anxiety about it, because there was so much. They were pushing right up against the edges of what the PlayStation could do, and this was a game that was going to come out on PlayStation, and this was a studio that had more experience probably with the PC. I think that's fair to say at this point. So I don't know. I know that the team everyone had this vision of what the game would be and what it could do, but I know that the tech team were up against what the PlayStation would allow them to do.
Yeah, so to me it sounds like they had the concept of the game already before they hired you. How did they present it to you as far as what they wanted from you? How did you start to write the story?
Yeah, so they had, so yeah, this idea already came. I believe that I'm right in saying that this came from Martin. Perhaps there were others involved. I'm not sure, but kind of looking at Destruction Derby and thinking about, well, hey, wouldn't it be great if we could actually not be confined to just this kind of crossroads or the different arenas to kind of smash into other people? Wouldn't it be great if we could go into a city? So I think that Martin was still he was inspired by things like the 1970s TV shows that he grew up with Starsky and Hutch and so on, and in particular he liked Ryan O'Neill's movie The Driver. So they had these ideas in mind that they would do something of that nature, but like I said, they hadn't really worked with story before, and frankly, at this time, late 90s, not many people had done lots of work in stories in video games in this kind of way. This was not there was some lineage for sure in terms of people writing fantasy stories, adventure stories with video games, but this felt like something that people hadn't really taken on before. Anyway, Gareth, full of practicality as ever, said, okay, he, like I said, he hired me for 2 weeks, and his brief was basically, can you just throw a story at this? So I just kind of looked at, I basically was shown a tech demo, okay, so here's cars and they can move, and you can imagine the different cities. We already kind of knew which cities that we were going to go to. I think that was already defined, although we hadn't figured out the order we were going to do anything in. And yeah, so that was the brief. I think I'd been there a few days just trying to get my head around what we could even do, because like I said, there wasn't a design team really. There was Gareth and Martin gave me this brief, but largely they just kind of left me to it. So I spent a few days just trying to work out, well, what could we even do? What could we ask a player to do that has any sort of story context to it? And even beyond that, or before that, really, it was just trying to figure out, well, what sort of missions could we give players that we could maybe later stitch into a story. Anyway, I was just starting to get my head around this and watch the Ryan O'Neill movie, which I hadn't seen before, and just try and understand what kind of tone Martin had in mind when I think the guys came back from a meeting they'd had in the States to say that, well, Walmart's wouldn't carry the game if he was a getaway driver. So that meant that, well, he's got to be an undercover cop, which seems kind of logical enough and makes enough sense that you could walk out of that meeting going, okay, well, I guess that's what we'll do. But certainly that was that was a problem for me, because logic really just is really strained at the point of, so I don't remember how many, maybe it's 38, something like that. Anyway, certain kind of around about that kind of number of missions that have to stretch chronologically in sequence, and the first kind of 2 or 3 missions are really not a problem as you start imagining the kind of tests you would have to do to kind of convince people of your skills, perhaps in joining a gang. But as that chain gets longer and longer, it starts becoming more strange. That logic. You imagine a movie, it might be, you might have effectively like 3 or 4 missions in that kind of story that build to this big thing that the undercover cop needs to go and do, because it makes some kind of sense. But 38, getting into that kind of number is difficult, because you reach a point where you think, well, how can you justify the kinds of things that you're doing as an undercover cop that really don't make a lot of sense? So that was obviously a problem. But of course, the whole point wasn't. The point really was to kind of find a story that would let the whole game hang together. So, in that sense, the story was definitely secondary to the primary concept, which was just, hey, let's let players drive around cities with a degree of freedom they've not had before, with kind of real feeling cities.
Now that is an incredible nugget that you just gave me, and how he was originally a getaway driver, but you actually flipped it so that Walmart was able to sell the game on its shelf. I think that's really cool, and I don't think a lot of people know that.
Walmart, yeah, I mean, in the 90s, it was a huge deal. It obviously wouldn't be, it's not analogous to now because of, online purchasing and so on. But I think that, I don't remember exactly what the stats were, but they were significant, that it would cause a huge dent in the prospective sales if Walmart wouldn't carry it. They were just such a big retailer, and the US market was the primary market where that game was expected to sell. So it was really no question. So as much as someone like me might gripe about it and say, oh, that's a shame, it doesn't make the story as good or as interesting. And, it's the same for Martin and Gareth. They weren't fans of that decision either, but there was really no decision to make. It just make it work however best you can, because there's too much riding on this, and it just has to allow the content to function, and sort of don't worry about it too much, was kind of the brief that I ended up getting. And so it's my first video game, and there's that, which is a problem in terms of story logic. But there were other parts of this brief, like on the 3D side. So we were using FMV, full motion video. But I remember the art director saying, you can't use too many characters. We've only got a small art team. You can't use females because we haven't got the rigs for them. We've only got one rig, limited to kind of memory space, so that if you see the original driver, you don't have female pedestrians walking around. Every pedestrian is based off of the same rig, and I couldn't use female characters. Well, I think I pushed back on that, but that we had to use a lot of distance shots, lots of dark, because kind of modeling faces was difficult. Again, for the small team and the amount of time we had, the tone couldn't be too dark, but also it wasn't a comedy. So yeah, there were all these issues to do with the kind of what I could do in terms of working with the 3D team, and also trying to sort of pick my way through a tone that would sort of work sufficiently well for what was needed. And this was also a question of get this done as soon as possible, because the game is supposed to come out next year. So it was a really steep learning curve with lots of things to kind of figure out, and lots of it I felt on my own for a lot of it. So I didn't have this team around me. Like these days, a project like that would have a narrative team, have maybe 4 or 5 people working with you. You'd also be working with a design team, and we didn't have any of that. We had people who knew about how to make cars look good, and how to make them move, and how to make cities. And we had a 3D team that were helping us, making the 3D stuff, the FMV movies. But yeah, there was definitely I just learned a lot. It was a real baptism of fire.
It really sounds like you learned a lot working on your first video game. When Driver was released, what was the reception around the office? Did it exceed expectations? I mean, it did become a smash hit in the United States.
Yeah, so I was a freelancer, so I wasn't in the studio at that time that it came out. My work had finished a few months, two or 3 months, I think, before it came out. So I can't gauge the atmosphere in the office, but I can say that as the development went on and the team grew, it became increasingly clear that there were considerable expectations, and I think it's good to say that it met what those expectations were. But really, that last, well, like I said, I kind of finished my work 2 or 3 months before it came out. People were working between that time, for sure. But in those last few months, when I was working, things had already kind of taken on this reality blur that happened. Heard about development crunch, I'm sure, and it was definitely that kind of situation where everything starts to detach, and you're not even sure what expectations you have anymore. You want the thing to work, you want the thing to stick together, you want the build to be accepted, you want to get to gold, reach the gold disc, and everything kind of work and it not implode. So there's this mixture of, sure, there are expectations, but it wasn't as clear as that. I wasn't able to hold that in my mind clearly. I think everyone was there was this kind of, I don't know if things can be frenzied if they last for several months, but that's kind of the situation that we were in, people sleeping at their desks and that kind of thing, just trying to make this thing work and kind of push it, squash it into space. But so I think it met them. I think that people felt as if it had done what it set out to achieve, but I think there was more just relief that thing was out. And then as people got a few days sleep and they started to see that those sales were being converted, I think that people started to feel good about that. But I suppose, also in the months leading up to it, there was a lot of press, and I suppose it sort of felt like there was this inevitable momentum that had built. It would have been incredible if that had just sort of suddenly dissipated on release. So I think that, so much coverage and so much of that was positive. I don't remember scores below 8, really. 8 out of 10. I feel like there was this juggernaut by that point that it was just thundering through the cultural space. That, yeah, I think there was, I think it was relief that we kind of got there, that we got over the line.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. You spend so much time working on a project, you just want to make sure that it reaches the finish line, kind of like you said. It's clear, though, that you're a great writer, but I'm wondering, did you ever play Driver, and did you ever beat it? That last level was a complete nightmare for me, so I'm kind of curious on your thoughts on it.
Well, I did play it, yes, but I mean, listen, the first mission was hard enough, and that's obviously closely inspired by it's basically the Ryan O'Neal scene, the Ryan O'Neal movie reconfigured into video game form in a way, and I definitely found that hard. And yes, I think I completed every mission at one point, but I was privy to all sorts of cheat codes that would help me just kind of jump in and I mean, often, so often while you're making a game, you want to be testing these things fast and checking that the things kind of work, that the flow works, and that the continuity is intact. And you're so wrapped up in that, when it's finished, I really don't think I'm alone in the fact that when you finish the game like that, particularly after you come through a development blur like that, the last thing you really want to do is pick the game up and kind of play it, because you generally are just seeing flaws or issues or things that you think, oh man, it's a shame we didn't get that sorted out, or wouldn't it be good if we'd done that? And you just kind of snowblind to it anyway. So yeah, I played all of the missions, but yeah, some of them I used more cheat codes on than others.
I feel like you almost had to use a cheat code on that last mission. It was so tough. So this next question I really enjoy asking because I feel like I get the most diverse answers, but what's a memory that you will always associate with Driver? It could be something funny, something serious, or just an emotion that you'll never forget when working on the game.
So I used to work, my hours became about 11 a.m. in the morning to about 4 a.m. in the morning. So I would spend some of that time with people. Some people would work late, but I would get lots of work done. You know, in those early hours when I used to take a cab back from the office to where I was staying. And one night, this cab driver swerved out of the way of something. I don't know what it was, and took a moment to control the car. And I remember just thinking how no one knew where my documents were. They didn't know how everything fitted together. This stuff was all in Word documents that I had saved on a thumb drive, and that, you know, just no one knew it. So I remember thinking how the game would be delayed if anything happened. I had to, so the next day I wrote a long email to Gareth to explain, here's where all my work is, but here's how everything fits together. This mission leads to this mission, and this connects to that, and then if player does this, then this is going to happen. And because there was originally a small branching story, most of that got cut, but there was we kept a little bit of it just at the end. There's a very slight branching element to the game, and you know, lots of this stuff, kind of like how the structure was going to work, was just stuff that I sort of felt my way through. So it's kind of a loose bag of missions, kind of structure idea. So it meant that we did chop some missions out, some missions got cut, and as long as they weren't key kind of core missions in this kind of structural spine, it didn't matter, which is partly why we did it. But so that all these kinds of things that just meant that I realized no one else knows. Everyone is so busy trying to get their stuff done that I'd never have a producer come and say, just checking in, can you check this stuff into Perforce, or you could check this stuff into, you know, we can have Google Docs or anything like that. So everything was so separate, and everyone was so rushed and just trying to make this thing work that, yeah, I just remember getting a real shock. I really need to explain this to someone so that people can still build the game.
Okay, so you just sparked a question with your answer talking about the branching of the story. Driver is a great game because of all the small details that go into it. And one of the small details that I love are the voicemails on the answering machine. Some of those voicemails make me laugh so hard, especially when it's the wrong caller. I thought they were hilarious. Did you write those voicemails, or do you know who did?
Yeah, I mean, I think I wrote all of those. I don't think anyone else wrote them. And yeah, you know what? I'd forgotten about them too. Yes, so yeah, this is a good example of where I was just trying to get my head around the tone, and you know, the Driver game just couldn't be the same tone as the Driver movie, the Ryan O'Neill movie. And I knew that was something that Martin liked and he wanted, but it just I kept having this problem with they just don't match, because you can do ridiculous things that are not cool and Ryan O'Neilly in the game. You can smash into stuff clumsily, which is how I tend to play the game. Or you can kind of chase pedestrians up the sidewalk. They jump out of the way. Again, I think that was a Walmart restriction too. So you can't actually run over them in Driver. They always just ping out of the way. But so the tone was something I was really just struggling with. And like I said, I had a sort of background in comedy, and that seemed to I kept sort of coming back to that, thinking, well, that's something that I think will be amusing, and we've got this situation here that set itself up to have these voicemails, and they were easy to write, easy to implement. There's no 3D art team required for them. So I remember sort of having a bit of fun with those. There were no design or tech dependencies on them, so people just kind of left me alone to just do whatever I thought with those. And really the process mostly was, in fact almost entirely I think, was this, that if Martin didn't balk at it, if he didn't object to it, then if I wrote it and Martin would oversee it, then it would just made it into the game. And I don't remember a lot of pushback really. I want to go back and listen to them now, because I haven't even thought about them.
Those voicemails are so brilliant, and I believe on YouTube there is a video that showcases all of them, so make sure you find that and make sure you listen to your own work, because it is worth it. Now I wanted to ask you this: how do you feel that you created such a critically acclaimed series and fan favorite series that produced a ton of games? Are you proud of what you helped build, and do you feel a sense of accomplishment?
Yeah, yes. So I'm happy that it got made, and I'm happy that it all made enough sense together, that it all kind of hung together well enough. I was happy that I hadn't let Gareth down. I mean, the studio were like, well, who's this guy? And Gareth's like, well, he's a writer, but I always suspected that the people in the team were like, yeah, but he's your friend. So there was that kind of gnawing away at me, and I was happy that I'd kind of figured out some problems, well, not exactly figured them out, but I'd taken on some problems that are perennial. Little did I really understand at the time, but they're perennial problems for games writers, the way that story and design kind of rub up against each other and kind of blend between each other. I was happy that I was dealing with that. I remember a head teacher at my primary school, so when I was 10 or 11, talking to my mum and saying, well, Maurice just wants to write stories and make games, but he's never going to get a job doing that. And I was happy that that I actually had found a way to kind of make games and stories, game design and storytelling work together. But in terms of the franchise, I hadn't really realized that's what I'd done at the time, or helped to do at the time that it came out. It wasn't until a few months later when Gareth said, okay, so we're going to make a sequel, and we're going to make a game called Stuntman as well, and we want to hire you again, that I realized, oh well, actually, I think we made something significant here. I mean, this was at a stage where video games were just starting to be taken seriously in a more mainstream cultural sense. So we had, we'd had arcade games and so on, but around about this time we have Tomb Raider happening, and we have Metal Gear Solid happening, and Driver. This is all pre the 3D GTAs. So the GTAs had existed, but they were top-down 2D games. So anyway, this was. It wasn't really clear to me that I had kind of moved into this space. But to me, I was going to make this game, and then I was going to go back to doing the other writing jobs that I did. And So yeah, this kickstarted a whole games writing career for me, which was thrilling. But I didn't, it didn't. I didn't have that kind of sense of distance that I could even be thrilled about it. And I was a freelance writer. I just liked having days booked, so I knew I was going to get paid, so I could pay bills.
Maurice, you certainly kicked off a career in video games that spanned over 20 years. I don't think you're in the industry anymore, but can you share with us what you're up to and if you're working on any other creative projects?
Well, I'm not sure how many fans there are of mine, or how many people who were fans of Driver who will follow me into other very different kinds of games, with different kinds of areas of writing at all. But I'll try to answer that all the same. So I still work in video games, but less. So I used to be doing that all the time, and now I do that part-time with doing other things as well. So quite often when I do work in video games, it's more as a consultant now, or doing some additional writing. So recent projects have included Fortnite, which obviously lots of people know. I just did a bit of narrative consultancy for them a couple of years ago, and I was involved in a game called Beyond the Page, Lost Words Beyond the Page, which was a story about a young girl and coming to terms with the illness of her grandmother and her imagination, and that was a lot of fun to work on. It's currently shortlisted in the nominations for the Independent Game Fund Excellence in Narrative Award. But so I wasn't the main writer, so Rhianna Pratchett was the principal writer, so I don't want to claim any undue credit with that, but I was involved as a consultant and doing additional writing for that. And in video games, a few years ago, I was a narrative director at 2K Australia, where we made Borderlands, the pre-sequel, which was one of my favourite games that I've worked on, and we made the DLC there for that as well. And I think that lots of Borderlands fans have enjoyed that DLC. But so more recently, less video games. I'm still doing some work as a voice producer or a voice director. I've been working on Burden of Command, which is RPG, tactical, digital war game set in World War II, which is somewhere in development. I'm not sure when that might come out, but working with a bunch of very thirsty indie guys, and really happy with the work that we've been doing. I have a small startup, so I'm a creative director of a company called Trojan Duck Games, based out of Troy in upstate New York, we're working on a story-driven game, which is a detective story set in a toy box world where a koala bear toy is on the hunt for her killer. And we're exploring some new experimental kind of innovative approaches to narrative design, and I don't have anything I can really show yet. There's a website, trojanduckgames.com, and we're on Twitter there at ducktrojan. But yeah, we're some way off being able to show that, but it's fun being able to work on something more self-directed, kind of try some things that I wanted to try. But when you're working with big franchises, you tend to not experiment so much. You've got other kinds of concerns, and there are many more people in that mix, which can be great, but also can be just not conducive to trying different, unusual, idiosyncratic things. So that's what I'm doing in terms of video games. I'm also now doing a lot of work in board games. I publish board games that are mostly based on history, so often military history. So one on the Battle of Freeman's Farm came out a couple of years ago, and a game last year was on the Battle of Chancellorsville. And I have a couple more, one about to be published next month on the American Revolution, and I just had a game on the 1565 Siege of Malta go through Kickstarter last month. So I'm doing lots of work in that space. I've just been working on a game on first century Roman Britain, which I think will be exciting if I can get that through the publishers. So yeah, still making lots of games. I mean, now my full-time job is an assistant professor at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, which is also upstate New York, where I teach and research. My specialties are, as you might expect, storytelling in games and also historical simulations. So that's what I do, but I've been able to take lots of that experience from the last 20 odd years and kind of filter it through my work at the university or the institute. And you know, my research is connected to those kinds of fields. Wow. Oh, and I wrote a movie. Yeah, I wrote a movie for a Belgian director that is now in pre-production. It's based on Belgian folklore, which about these buck riders, these ghosts or demons who used to ride goats in the night in the Middle Ages and steal from people. So yes, so that's also something that is kind of cooking somewhere.
Wow, you have an extremely diverse portfolio of work. All of your creative works are very impressive, and I'm sure it takes a lot of effort to keep all of those projects in focus. Very impressive, Maurice. Now, I want to shift gears, pun intended, and discuss Driver 2 a little bit. You returned as the writer for Driver 2, but I want to know, how long after the release of the original Driver did you and the team start working on Driver 2?
Very quickly. I'm trying to be a bit more specific. So I think that I'm trying to remember, but I think that I remember the game coming out and I was down in Oxford at the time, but I think probably a week or two after that there were conversations about Driver 2 and what that would entail.
Well, now that would make a lot of sense because the first Driver was released in 99 and Driver 2 was released in 2000. So I was just curious on how long it takes for a turnaround like that. Now, the plot of Driver 2, I feel, is a lot darker and more mature than the original. In the opening video, there's guys getting blasted by sawed-off shotguns. Was the darker direction on purpose, or did it just kind of come out that way? Did you have more freedom to write a story? How did it all come together?
That's a good question. I think that it was clearer that the whole kind of premise of this undercover cop was clearly stretched in that first iteration. I think my own feelings about it were that we couldn't do much about that. We were sort of saddled with that. It was important to have that premise so that Walmart would stock the game. So I remember thinking about how misdirection might help us if the audience wasn't really thinking about the ludicrousness of that situation, given how much damage this undercover cop was doing in order to crack this case. If we misdirected the audience and we got them to think about other stuff, they might not think too much about, might not look too closely at that kind of underlying ridiculousness, you know. So I think that there was some attempt to to misdirect. We also, it wasn't just for me, Martin also kind of felt that we could take the tone darker, and it sort of felt like that was kind of delivering on the promise of what the game could be. There were some expectations from people that we ought to perhaps move it in that direction to kind of amp the drama of it. So I don't know, that's a bit of a wishy-washy answer.
How much do the cities affect the story and vice versa? Does the team tell you where they are creating these cities and you craft the story around them? Or do you tell the team the story and they create the cities? I believe in Driver 2, the 4 cities are Chicago, Havana, Las Vegas, and Rio de Janeiro.
It's mostly the team saying, here are our cities, here's what we're thinking of doing, these are the ones we think are appealing to us, and then crafting a story around that. Of course, every city that is chosen comes with a sort of inherent promise of a certain kind of story or certain story potentials sort of come baked into that. So I remember Driver 2, there was someone on the team was saying, hey, let's do New Orleans, that's interesting, and we could have interesting environmental problems with levees breaking and so on. Anyway, we didn't do that, thankfully, or potentially sort of deeply sensitive topic, but in any case, that was sort of a tone shift that was too much for what the brand thought it was, I think, at the time. Sort of more into sort of an action movie genre than the more sort of crime type genre that we were into. But when you think about Havana, you think about certain types of stories that kind of presented themselves as, when we saw that list, it kind of felt like it was telling us to do an international crime ring. Felt like that's what the story was about. So that came from the cities rather than the other way around.
Did you feel any pressure this time to write a great story now that you were established in the video game industry? Driver 1 was pretty successful, so did that put any pressure on yourself to make the plot of Driver 2 even better?
I didn't feel like I was established in any way. The pressure was, you already kind of touched on it earlier, was to do with time. I mean, we had that pressure the first time around, but in a different way, because I was so late to join the team. But so there was a pressure about we don't have a lot of time to put this together. We actually hired a designer who came on board and took a lot of the weight off of what sort of by default come onto my shoulders. Originally, Driver was essentially this super interesting tech demo, but didn't really have any game design added to it. And when I was brought on board to tell a story, that kind of got kind of fell under my purview a lot as well, trying to figure out, well, what mission ideas are there and how do they relate to some sort of narrative. And with Driver 2, the pressure of providing missions went largely off of my shoulders. Some of that came from story ideas, but there was much more thought went into how those missions would work as pieces of design.
For the first Driver, you shared this amazing fact that Walmart had you rewrite the plot in order to get it on their shelves. Are there any interesting nuggets of information on Driver 2 that is not well known?
There wasn't an equivalent. I mean, the same premise held true, that Walmart would turn on their heels if we decided, know what, he's gone bad, or he's decided he's changed his mind, or replaced that character. So we were still stuck with that idea, an undercover cop. No, I know that Antonio Fargas was one of the voices in Driver 2. He did the voice of Jones. Antonio Fargas was Huggy Bear in the original 1970s Starsky and Hutch TV show. And that was just us dipping our toes into that world of better known actors and thinking about how they might even be a thing that we could leverage for marketing purposes. We didn't really do that much with Antonio Fargas, and it was just, like I said, just us dipping our toes into it. We did this more, the franchise did it more, and the industry as a whole did this more over the coming decades, but that was our first exposure to it, really.
I loved your answer for the original Driver, so I have to ask it again for Driver 2, but what's a memory that you will never forget or a feeling when working on that project? Is there something that will always stick out to you about Driver 2?
I don't have an equivalent, but I do remember when Antonio Fargas was in the studio, we showed him pictures of Jones and just tried to explain who he was and help give him a read on the character, and Antonio was full of suggestions about how this character should in fact move like him and look more like him, which was kind of sweet, but also utterly impossible because we were, deep into development at that time, and it was just too difficult to explain to him how that was not possible, and I just had to politely say thank you for your thoughts, and we couldn't possibly act on it. Voice recording was late down the line. We weren't going to change any of the animation and any of the models, the rigs that we had. So I just remember that sort of awkwardness as he was very enthusiastic about it, and I had to sort of politely tell him we wouldn't be doing that, but thank him all the same.
It's been over 10 years since we've seen a release in the Driver series. The last Driver that you worked on was Parallel Lines. Would you like to see the series come back? Do you think it should come back?
Yeah, I mean, I guess you'd have to, when you deal with a question like that, Ubisoft would need to think about, well, what is it that they're, obviously attempting to make money by making a decision like that, but what is it about that franchise that means that that's a viable possibility, given the expense of making it? It's a serious decision. You've got to look at the marketplace and decide, is there room for it? We've got driving games that are looking better and better. We've got GTA, which is a law unto itself, really. Is there space for it? So I guess that would be the question you'd have to kind of confront. Where would it go? And certainly storytelling games have got better, and we've found all sorts of better ways of telling more interesting stories. I think that to sort of pull things full circle, in lots of ways the market has matured in a way that I think GTA demonstrates this, that it would be possible to have a game with a morally grey or even more morally dubious or outright amoral character at the heart of a story. I know that Martin's original concept was kind of this open world idea where you would pick up jobs freely and as this getaway driver and go do those jobs, and sort of I might be putting words in Martin's mouth here, but I think sort of he was somewhat inspired by Elite and that kind of free form emergent storytelling world that we have, where you you become a trader or you become a pirate. It's sort of up to you. You figure it out and make your own way. And I think that our marketplace now would allow for a game like that. It would still have to fight its corner and kind of muscle out some room in that space. But why not? We have plenty of RPG games where you quest about and you skill up and you pick your way through the moral conundrum of the different sorts of quests that come your way. And I think that a game like that, I think that seems viable to me. And then I guess, further questions are to do with, well, what's the strength of the brand still, and how many people does it mean anything to? If it doesn't mean enough to enough people, then might you just as well start again from scratch, taking that concept. When you work with the existing brand, you've got the disappointing people who have certain expectations. So I guess you need to do some market research to figure out what are those expectations, and to what extent is the brand revivable and in what form. If that brand is revivable but in such a loose way, then you don't get anything from the brand itself, perhaps.
Maurice, thank you so much for your time today. I know you've got your hands full with a new baby and many creative projects, so I appreciate you taking a trip down memory lane with us to discuss the Driver series. And of course, thank you, the listener, for tuning in. If you love exclusive interviews with game creators and game developers, make sure you hit that sub button to watch and listen to plenty of more interviews that I have coming up. Thanks for listening.